10 o'clock this morning, we are going to see the publication of the Equality and Human Rights Commission report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. It is expected to be a damning indictment of the failure to tackle anti-Semitism in the party, although early reports leaks suggested that it's not actually going to say that the party is institutionally racist, but it will be very, very critical of the general handling of complaints of anti-Semitism, although unlikely to specifically recommend disciplinary action against high-profile individuals, including Jeremy Corbyn himself and some of his closest advisers. Will this be the end of a painful chapter for the Labour Party and indeed for Britain's Jewish population? Or does this tell us that there is an institutional problem in the Labour Party? Let's talk to Lord Austin. Previously, Ian Austin, Labour MP, now an independent peer and chair of Mainstream UK, a cross-party campaign to combat extremism in public life. Good morning to you, Ian.
Good morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. You, of course, resigned from the party over the anti-Semitism issue because you were adopted by a Jewish family and you just felt that it was untenable for you to remain in the party. What are you expecting to hear in this report?
Well, look, we don't know exactly what's in the report, but I think the one thing we can be certain about is that this has been an utterly shameful period for the Labour Party. Huge offence caused to the Jewish community. And they're the people... I mean, it's not, this isn't about me. I mean, they're the people we should be thinking about today. We should be thinking about the campaign against anti-Semitism and the Jewish labour movement who made the complaints that led to this inquiry. We should be thinking, I think, about Jewish women MPs who were told they don't have human blood or were driven out of the party by racists. People like Luciana Berger, Louise Ellman, Ruth Smeeth, Margaret Hodge, targeted as part of this. We should be thinking about the staff who were driven out, the brave members of staff, the whistleblowers who told the truth about what was happening. This has been a really shocking period, Members have been arrested for racial hatred or harassment. Senior figures, claiming Hitler was a Zionist, denying or questioning the Holocaust, and Jewish members being held to account for, Israel's policies, and a really bizarre an unpleasant obsession with Israel has developed in the Labour Party. They hold the world's only Jewish state to standards they would never expect from any other country.
Yeah, I've always thought that people who are concerned with Israel's policies, and I think there's lots of things the Israeli government does that I don't agree with, but they seem far more concerned with Israel than, Bashar al-Assad in Syria and, the mullahs in Iran. It's absolutely extraordinary that they should hold the only democratic state in the Middle East to such high standards as well.
Well, that's completely right. But I'm afraid it's become a really unpleasant and bizarre obsession.
Has it all gone away because Jeremy Corbyn is no longer leader of the Labour Party? Is the Labour Party, has it all been wiped clean and no longer does the Labour Party have this problem? Because this problem wasn't there before Jeremy Corbyn. I grew up in the Labour Party, same as you did. My parents were very much involved in the Labour parties, and my father stood for election, Labour, and all that. And at no point would it have ever crossed my mind that anyone could have claimed there was institutional anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. This was, I think, the norm under Jeremy Corbyn. Has it gone now?
Well, I think it existed in sort of dark corners before, and it existed outside the Labour Party. But what happened is that every crank and conspiracy theorist in the country joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not saying everybody who supported Jeremy Corbyn is a crank and conspiracy theorist, but certainly many cranks and conspiracy theorists joined the Labour Party to support him. And I don't think this is the end, no. Because I think this is probably going to set out steps the Labour Party have got to take to address this problem and to deal with it. But the key lesson for me is what happens when people allow a mainstream political party to be taken over by the hard left and by people from outside of mainstream politics. And what happened here? Let's go back and think about this. They altered the membership rules and they allowed all these people to join. MPs who should have known better nominated Corbyn, even though lots of his sort of unacceptable associations, his support for Hamas, Hezbollah, the people he'd worked with, the things he'd said, lots of these things were known about in 2015. And he'd spent decades working with all sorts of extremists, in some cases terrorists and anti-Semites. He was completely unfit to lead the Labour Party. And I think then what happened, this is a really tragic thing, is that people, because for reasons of personal advancement or because they wanted to keep their jobs or remain as MPs, they sort of they knew it was wrong, and they knew he was unfit to be Prime Minister, but they sort of supported and sustained his leadership.
And well, that's a bit of a concern,
And
isn't it? Because there's a question mark over Keir Starmer here. I don't think for a moment that Keir Starmer has got an anti-Semitic bone in his body. Don't question that at all. The first thing he did when he became Labour leader was to reach out to the Jewish community, and that was a very welcome effort that he made. However, do you recall at any point when he was in the shadow cabinet campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister of this country that he spoke out about anti-Semitism in the party and the party's failure to deal with it?
well, look, I'm sure he said anti-Semitism was a bad thing and the Labour Party had to do more to deal with it. But for me, that wasn't really the test. The test for me is, what did they do to stand up for Luciana Berger when she was being bullied out of the Labour Party by racists? What did they do to support Louise Ellman? What did they do to support Margaret Hodge when she was subjected to an unfair disciplinary process? What did they do to support Ruth Smeeth when she was being subject to such huge levels of disgusting abuse? Where were they when the Jewish community organised a protest against racism, against the Labour Party in Parliament Square? There were only about 20 or 30 MPs there. Imagine how different it would have been if every single Labour MP had turned up and demanded Corbyn get a grip of this. Imagine, there was one occasion when Tom Watson, the deputy leader, organised a letter that he asked MPs and peers to sign, and 100 of them signed it. They said to me, "Ian, isn't it great? We've got 100 people signing this letter." I thought, well, what about the other 300? And only one member of the Shadow Cabinet signed Tom Watson's letter. And do you know who that was?
Who?
Tom Watson.
That kind of says a lot about it. Would you consider rejoining the Labour Party now that Keir Starmer is leader?
Look, Keir is obviously a huge improvement on Corbyn. No question about that. And as you say, I mean, he's clearly not an anti-Semite and he's clearly not an extremist. But in the end, I think people should have spoken out more. I do.
And this is the thing, isn't it?
Do I want to rejoin?
Yeah.
Look, I think people ask me. Somebody was asking me this yesterday. I spent my life in the Labour Party. I regard myself as Labour, but I think the party's culture was poisoned, and I think its processes were corrupted, and I think people, people in senior positions stood by whilst this happened.
Can you imagine another scenario?
And so I'm not sort of, I'm in no rush.
Okay.
I'm in no rush to rejoin the Labour Party.
I can remember before the last election, I had Jewish friends and my own doctor say that they and their families were talking about emigrating if Jeremy Corbyn got elected. They were genuinely worried, genuinely scared for their and their family's safety. Can you imagine us ever being in a scenario ever again in this country where the prospect of one of the major political parties in this country getting elected means that hundreds of thousands of people in this country are scared for their lives?
I think, look, the Labour Party's got to learn from this, and it's got to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. And I think we've got to, we've really got to value and protect institutions on which our democracy is based. There's got to be zero tolerance for extremism and racism. And I think they've got to look at in detail at what happened here, and they've got to look at, there are all sorts of complaints that were brushed under the carpet. I think they've got to reopen those and subject them to a proper sort of complaints process now. I think I think they've got a lot of work to do.
Okay,
show
thank
that
you.
They're taking this really seriously.
Lord Austin, Ian, really appreciate you joining us. Former Labour MP, now independent peer, chair of Mainstream UK. Really appreciate you speaking out. I can feel how emotional this still is for you. We know, of course, this report is going to be published at 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock, we're going to be hearing from Keir Starmer. We know also a statement's going to be released by Jeremy Corbyn, because has advanced, and people who personally criticised that, getting advance warning of this.